Every day I receive a newsletter from Ryan Holiday called The Daily Stoic. This usually consists of a small message that will benefit us throughout our day, like live like this to handle anything. And then he will bring in characters like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, or Epictetus and how they handled an event in their life. It just so happens that the day that I was writing this video was the day that this newsletter was relevant to what I was writing about, and something I needed to propel me forward with this idea that I wanted to share with you. It was a reaffirmation that I'm not alone in what I wanted to speak to you about, which in all honesty, I kind of needed, because it's one of those things where you feel like nobody else will be having those thoughts. Nobody else will be doing the things that you do, which makes it more scary because of the extra vulnerability aspect. When in reality, it's probably not possible to think of a thought that hasn't already been thought by somebody else. That being said, I do appreciate the reassurance. Cheers, Ryan, for sharing this apt quote from Seneca. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. I've come to this realization that in this story we call life, I've actually turned over a new page without even noticing. And now I'm like halfway down the page. There are many reasons why I feel like this. I've picked up some new habits and I've started a new hobby too. And these are the parts that I want to share with you today. Because if they can help with my growth, then it's likely that they can help with yours too. As I'm writing this self-titled book called Life and getting further and further down the page, I'm beginning to see a through line. Sometimes it's quite obviously there, and other times it likes to hide in plain sight in other forms to see if I'm paying attention. And that through line is presence. I'm going to ask you 2 questions that I want you to think about. Have you ever actually tried to be present for like 10 seconds? Now, I can't figure out what's more difficult, being present by myself or being present around other people. At least with other people, we have their words and actions as a distraction, whereas by ourselves, we have our thoughts going round and round like a merry-go-round. Can you imagine not having a voice in your head when you're thinking? To me, that is a world that doesn't exist. I was listening to a Modern Wisdom Q&A podcast the other day, and Chris was asked the question, do you have an inner monologue? And as he started to answer, he said that not everybody does, which I knew. But then he Googled the statistics of how many people have an inner monologue. He said this was around 30 to 50% of people that don't have an inner monologue, which then means there are around 50 to 70% of people that don't have an inner monologue. I had no idea it was that many. And honestly, I thought it'd be the other way around. As a side note, I just want to say, just because this video is focused around inner monologue and self-talk, that doesn't mean that you will get nothing from this video if you don't have an inner monologue. Arguably, if you don't have an inner monologue, then you will learn more than a person who does. This video could potentially help you in the future or somebody else you care about. After finding all of this out and having so many questions, I went down one of my oh so familiar rabbit holes and created this video. Recently, I've been trying to be more conscious around the present moment and trying to lower the amount of times I will allow my mind to wander throughout the day. I'm the kind of guy that will try and preempt the conversation before the conversation has even happened, if it happens. The conversation hasn't happened, and yet I'm still trying to plan ahead. Can we talk about how crazy that is for a second? I'm imagining and going over a conversation and pretending that I know how people are going to react to something I might say. Pretending that I can understand the inner workings of somebody else's mind. I don't know about you, but I'm still trying to figure out the inner workings of my own mind. Thankfully, I'm not as crazy as I originally thought, or at least according to some of the research I found. There's something called the Self-Talk Schedule, or the STS, which was created by Tom Brinthart and colleagues in 2009. This is to study the roles of self-talk in people's everyday lives. There are 7 studies that help develop the STS. In this first study in the article, there are 4 categories and 22 statements or items that fit into those 4 categories. If you want to have a more in-depth look at the study, it'll be in the description down below. The 4 categories are self-assessment, self-reinforcement, self-criticism, and self-management. When I started to read these statements, I realized that 11 out of 22 of these were applicable to me, which then made me feel more normal and might make you feel more normal too. The first one that I'm going to share is one that I was just talking about. I try to anticipate what somebody might say and how I will respond to him or her. The second one, I'm trying to give myself more guidance and direction. And lastly, I want to analyze something that has recently happened to me. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely one of those people that can get caught chatting to themselves or mumbling, especially when I'm concentrating. A lot of people will have you believe that the person who has an inner dialogue is a person who must have gone through some sort of traumatic experience, or it's because of depression or anxiety, which in some cases might be true. After doing some research, some serious and some not so serious, just browsing around the internet, seeing what everyday people are talking about when it comes to this topic, my favorite piece of information that I found around this is that the people who engage in inner dialogue are the people that have had some sort of imaginary friend when they were younger. They got so used to talking to this imaginary friend. Even when this imaginary friend disappeared, they continued to talk to it, which now when I say it, it sounds kind of sad. There's also something quite warming about that idea too. Like those people will feel like they have some sort of extra comfortability and make them feel less alone. Now, this was just something I found on the internet on some blog written by a housewife about her husband. But to back this up with some serious research from Tom Brinthaupt, back again in 2012 with Christian T. Dove, said in an article that adults who reported having had an imaginary friend in childhood reported more frequent self-talk than those who did not have one. Which is interesting because I don't remember having had an imaginary friend when I was younger. So this doesn't apply to me. But a little cherry on the top that I can relate to, and you might be able to too, is this. They found that adults growing up as only children without siblings reported more frequent self-talk than those growing up with siblings. Now that could literally be it. That could be the reason that I engage in inner self-talk. And it could be the reason you engage in inner self-talk. There's an article called Self-Reported Speech in University Students. And at the beginning of this article, there is a list collated over 20 researchers and how they found inner speech can benefit us, including planning, problem solving, decision making, setting goals, short-term memory, autobiographical memory, task switching performance, rehearsing person-to-person communicative encounters, emotional expression, and self-reflection. Also a bar graph that shows the most frequent inner speech topics. As you can see, problem solving thinking has taken the top spot. Underneath that, we have emotional in general, and the third most thought about topic in this study is negative emotions. It's interesting because in general, 9 times out of 10, when I've come across self-talk, it's usually looked at through a negative scope, and always about how we can get ourselves out of our own heads and be present, which is almost seen as ultimate enlightenment. I think in general, in the Western society, or maybe it's just a British thing, we're more likely to point out the negative things and fixate on them, instead of highlighting or appreciating the positives. Yes, negative emotions are in third place, but look at what's in first place. That's problem solving. Being present is important, but being present 24/7 and not being in your head at all is also not a good thing. Keeping completely transparent with you, this study is an incredibly small study in Canada based off 76 university students, which adds to my next point. In general, if you're looking for a study to back yourself up, if you look hard enough, there will be one. That's not to negate the information that I've given, because it's very clear from the research I found from Zac, Morin, Cross, Brinthaupt, the self-talk theory, the books and studies that I haven't even touched upon, shows to me that this is a very comprehensively studied area in psychology. And honestly, every time I found a new bit of information or a new article or something that intrigued me, it was really hard not to open up a new kind of worms. I'm just showing you what I found interesting. You are your own person, and it's completely up to you if this affects or doesn't affect your thinking for the future. So I've thrown a bit of research at you, meshed in with some of my opinion. Now it's time to tell you what I've been doing to help myself. So without further ado, the moment we've all been waiting for, here are some practical steps that have helped me be more present and get out of my own head. I said at the beginning of this video that I've taken up a new hobby. Well, do you remember in my video, Alone in a Crowded Room, when I said one of my body goals for the next year was to become more mobile? As I'm a man of my word, and also because I've been enjoying myself a lot, I've taken up yoga. And I don't even want to talk about what this has done for me physically. I actually want to talk about what this has done for me mentally. This has by far been the most impactful practice that has helped me be more present and more self-aware in my day-to-day life. Because what I didn't realize, being the absolute yoga virgin I was, is that actually yoga is not so much about the stretching and the flexibility and what it does for you physically. In truth, it's more so about being aware and listening to your body. And as a result of relaxing your body into different poses, sometimes difficult and some easy, you begin to understand your body more and more. From my experience, yoga is quite the opposite to how I see my weight training. Weight training for me, in short, is how much I can push myself safely, sometimes not so safely, until I can't push anymore. I enjoy training to failure, or very close. Otherwise, I feel like I've not worked hard. Yoga is almost the opposite for me, because it's about practicing the poses almost effortlessly in a way. Weight training is my yin, and yoga is my yang. And together, I have the balance of both flexibility, mobility, and strength training. In yoga, you are guided throughout to focus on your breathing, no matter how difficult the pose. Often, I find myself shaking like a leaf, and then the voice on the video will tell me to focus on my breathing and keep everything on the mat. Meaning, don't let your mind wander and drift away. Focus on what you're doing right now. Focus on the pose, focus on relaxing. What I found after practicing yoga for a little bit now, similar to weight training, is that it has its own domino effect. And that is making me more present in my day-to-day life, because I'm now more in tune with my body than I ever have been. For example, I now know that in general, I hold a lot of tension in my face and my feet. So when I'm sat down, just chilling, I'll do a quick body scan and think about, where am I holding my tension in my body right now? Where do I need to relax a little bit more? Similarly, I could be stood in a queue at the shop. That's the time where you bring out your phone, right? And you start scrolling, or you start replying to somebody because you've got a few minutes to spare, so why not? This is when, again, I will do a quick body scan, and maybe I'll roll my shoulders back a little bit, I'll straighten my head, and I'll just make sure my posture's good. My butt's tucked in, so I haven't got the duck butt. All of those kind of things. It just makes you more present. It's bringing you back to reality. I've even started to cross my legs on purpose when I can. Honestly, my flexibility is that bad. You remember as a child, you would sit on the assembly floor, legs crossed, no problem. You didn't think twice about this ability that you had as a kid. And you certainly didn't see it as some kind of ability to cross your legs. Because if you're like me and you've been weight training for a while, your hips and your lower back probably quite tight. It's little things like this that you can do in your day-to-day life that will actually benefit you in the long run. It seems so simple, but it's also bringing you back to the present moment and getting out of your head. Similarly, meditation has helped me with this too. As you can see from this video, my mind is always following some path of dialogue. Again, it's not so much about the practice itself. It's more how it's been benefiting me in my day-to-day life and bringing me back to the present moment. In essence, with meditation, you are trying to do two things. You are trying to let your thoughts pass and not fixate on them, and you are trying to focus on your breathing. I've found this helps me because it's made me more conscious and helped me recognize at a quicker speed when my mind starts wandering. Whilst I'm on the topic of hobbies and how they can benefit our lives, there's something I found on Instagram that I want to share with you. And I think it is pretty shitty, because now, in general, if we're not good at something, then we don't want to do it, thinking that we have to be good at everything. And also, how are we going to get good at it if we don't do it? And the final tip to get back into the present moment and into reality is simply to utilize your 5 senses. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you taste? Now, when I think about using these 5 senses, it brings me back to when I've helped people with panic attacks in the past. Because usually with panic attacks, they're so stuck in their head and they need to get out of their head as quick as possible. Otherwise, they feel like they're going to choke or explode or suffocate. They need to be brought back into their present moment. And how do they do this? Okay, what can you touch? What can you hear? It brings them out of their heads and back into their environment. Venturing down this more spiritual path recently, I can happily say sometimes there will be no research, no reason, sometimes research against what you feel is good. If your chosen thing works for you and it makes you happy, even if it is because of a placebo effect, then who cares? In my experience, from what I found, is that the more authentic you are, the more you lean into yourself, the more peaceful you will be, because you are not using up unnecessary brain power pretending to be something that you're not, or someone else that you're not. And as a result, the more you'll attract others like you into your space, or at least people you appreciate being around. Think about the people you appreciate and admire. Usually, the reason you feel that way is because they are unapologetically themselves. To round this all up, I want to speak to you of 2 quotes that Alicia Keys said in a podcast. And I'm not going to lie, this is probably my favorite part of the entire video. These are just 2 things she said so nonchalantly that just hit me. You know when you hear something or read something and you need to share it with someone immediately? This is exactly how I feel about these quotes, and this is why I'm sharing them with you today. Fingers crossed, if you've taken something from this video, this will land with you too. She said, "You don't always have to feel good." This resonated with me because it made me think about my video, Are We the Overdiagnosed Generation? Because it's so damn true. We don't always have to feel good. We don't always have to be in a positive mindset. And that doesn't mean that because of this, there's something wrong with us. It just makes us human. And finally, she said, "I had to create what I wanted to hear." When I first heard this, I heard this from more of a ruminating perspective. If you are going to dive into the swimming pool of your own thoughts, think things you want to hear. So if you, like me, are one of those people who can engage in self-talk and have a second voice in their head, or sometimes multiple voices at any given time, you can create what you want to listen to. You choose the records. You choose whether or not there's a scratch on the disc. You choose whether or not the song plays on loop. You are your own DJ.